The early morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Los Angeles International Airport's private terminal. Sarah Mitchell's black Mercedes S-Class pulled up to the exclusive entrance, its polished surface reflecting the golden California sunrise. At 35 years old, Sarah had already accomplished what many would consider impossible, building a technology company from her small apartment into a billion-dollar enterprise in just 7 years. Today was supposed to be another milestone in her remarkable journey. Her company, Innovatech Solutions, had just completed a $500 million acquisition of their biggest competitor. The news would break on Wall Street in less than 6 hours, and Sarah needed to be in New York for the announcement. As the car came to a stop, Sarah checked her reflection in her phone's camera. Her dark brown skin glowed with natural confidence, and her carefully styled hair was pulled back in a professional bun. She straightened her navy blue Armani blazer and made sure her lucky pearl earrings, a gift from her late grandmother, were securely fastened. "Miss Mitchell, we've arrived," her driver, Marcus, announced as he opened the car door. He had been with her since the early days of her success, and his warm smile always helped calm her nerves before big moments. "Thank you, Marcus," Sarah replied, gathering her designer briefcase containing the final acquisition papers. "Don't forget to pick up your daughter's birthday cake on your way home. Take the rest of the day off after this drop." Marcus's face lit up at her thoughtfulness. This was typical Sarah. Even on one of the biggest days of her career, she remembered the small details about her employees' lives. It was one of the many reasons her company had been voted best place to work 3 years in a row. The private terminal was quiet at this early hour. Only a few other passengers were visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, mostly older white men in expensive suits having coffee while waiting for their flights. The click of Sarah's heels echoed against the marble floor as she walked toward the security checkpoint, her mind already racing through the day's schedule. She had planned everything perfectly. The flight would take 5 hours and 20 minutes. Her team in New York had arranged for a quick hair and makeup touch-up at the private hangar, followed by the press conference at 2 p.m. sharp. By evening, she would be celebrating with her team at her favorite restaurant in Manhattan. Sarah smiled as she remembered how far she had come. Just 10 years ago, she was working as a junior programmer, dreaming of creating software that could revolutionize supply chain management. Everyone had told her the market was too crowded, that she didn't have enough experience, that she needed to wait her turn, but Sarah had never been good at waiting. Instead, she had worked 18-hour days, sleeping on her office floor, eating instant noodles, and coding until her fingers cramped. She had pitched her idea to 142 investors before finally getting her first yes. That first investor, an older black woman named Dorothy Wilson, had seen something in Sarah that others had missed: raw determination. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah pulled out her credentials. Her pilot's information, flight documentation, and identification were all neatly organized in a leather folder. She had done this routine dozens of times before at private terminals across the country. It was usually quick and simple: a quick check of documents, a polite nod, and she would be on her way to her waiting jet. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the diamond-studded watch on her wrist, another reminder of her journey. It was her first big purchase after Innovatech landed its first major client. She had kept it as a symbol of that early victory, a reminder that every big achievement started with a single step forward. Sarah took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of coffee and leather that always permeated private aviation terminals. The subtle scent of success, she often joked with her team. Her phone buzzed with a message from her New York office. "Everything's ready here, boss. Show them how it's done." She smiled and squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment. In her briefcase were papers that would not only transform her company but potentially reshape the entire industry. Sarah Mitchell was about to become one of the most powerful CEOs in Silicon Valley, and nothing was going to stand in her way. Or so she thought, as she stepped forward toward the security checkpoint, completely unaware that the next few minutes would test her in ways that had nothing to do with business acumen or technical expertise, and everything to do with something she had faced all her life: the color of her skin. James Peterson stood at his security post, his gray uniform pressed to perfection, his badge gleaming under the terminal's bright lights. In his 15 years working security at private aviation terminals, he had developed what he called a sixth sense about who belonged and who didn't. The moment he saw Sarah Mitchell walking towards his checkpoint, That sense started buzzing. You watched her approach, taking in her expensive suit, designer briefcase, and confident walk. Something didn't sit right with him. In his mind, she didn't fit the usual profile of private jet passengers. Peterson straightened his back and adjusted his belt, preparing to assert his authority. "Excuse me, miss," he called out sharply before Sarah even reached his desk. "The main terminal is in the other direction. This is a private aviation facility." His tone carried a hint of satisfaction, the kind that came from feeling powerful. Sarah maintained her professional smile as she placed her documentation on the counter. "Good morning, Officer Peterson," she said, reading his name tag. "I'm aware this is the private terminal. I'm Sarah Mitchell, CEO of Innovatech Solutions. My jet is waiting on the tarmac." Peterson barely glanced at her documents. "Right," he drawled, making no move to pick them up. "And I'm Warren Buffett. Look, miss, I don't want any trouble, but you need to leave. Now." His hand rested meaningfully on his radio. A few feet away, a white businessman in a rumpled suit walked through the checkpoint. Peterson gave him a friendly nod, not even checking his credentials. The contrast wasn't lost on the small crowd beginning to gather nearby. "Officer Peterson," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was racing, "I provided all the necessary documentation. My pilot filed the flight plan yesterday. You'll find everything in order if you just check." Peterson's face reddened. "Listen here," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I know every regular who comes through this terminal, and you're not one of them. So either you're lost, or you're trying to pull something. Either way, you need to leave before I call security." "You are security," Sarah pointed out quietly, maintaining her composure. "And I'm not lost. I've flown from this terminal 12 times in the past year alone." A younger security officer nearby shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the situation was getting out of hand. But Peterson was his superior, and he remained silent. "Now you're lying to me," Peterson snapped, his voice rising. "I would remember if someone like you was a regular." The emphasis he put on "someone like you" made his meaning crystal clear to everyone within earshot. Sarah felt a familiar knot in her stomach, the same one she'd felt in countless boardrooms when she was the only black woman present, the same one she pushed down when investors asked to speak to the real CEO during meetings. But years of dealing with prejudice had taught her how to handle these moments. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. "Officer Peterson, I have here the confirmation from your supervisor about today's flight. Would you like to see it?" Her voice remained steady, professional. Peterson's face twisted with anger. "Put that phone away. No recordings allowed in the security area." He stepped out from behind his desk, his body language aggressive. Around them, the scene was drawing more attention. A woman in a business suit had her phone out, quietly recording. Two pilots standing near the coffee machine were whispering to each other, one of them reaching for his phone. "I'm not recording," Sarah explained patiently. "I'm showing you my flight confirmation, but since you mention it, this is a public space, and recording is perfectly legal." She maintained eye contact with Peterson, refusing to be intimidated. "That's it," Peterson growled, reaching for his radio. "I'm calling this in. We got a situation here." His hand shook slightly as he capped the radio. "Control, this is Peterson at Checkpoint A. I need backup for an unauthorized person refusing to leave the premises." Sarah didn't move. She'd worked too hard and come too far to be turned away like this. She pulled out her phone again, this time dialing a number she knew by heart. "Who are you calling?" Peterson demanded, his voice rising with each word. "Your supervisor," Sarah replied calmly. "And after that, my lawyers, and then the media. Would you like to check my documentation now, Officer Peterson, or should we wait for everyone to arrive?" The air in the terminal grew thick with tension as other travelers stopped to watch the scene unfold. In the distance, hurried footsteps could be heard approaching. The next few moments would change not just Sarah's day, but the entire culture of private aviation security. The terminal's atmosphere crackled with tension as Sarah stood her ground, her phone still in hand. More people had gathered around the checkpoint, creating a half-circle of concerned and curious onlookers. The morning sun streaming through the terminal's windows cast long shadows across the polished floor, like nature itself was drawing a line between right and wrong. "Ma'am, put the phone down now." Peterson's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. His face had turned a deep shade of red, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the terminal's cool air conditioning. "This is a restricted area, and I'm giving you a direct order." Sarah's finger hovered over her phone screen, where her lawyer's contact information was displayed. Years of business negotiations had taught her to recognize pivotal moments, and this was definitely one of them. She kept her voice steady and clear, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "Officer Peterson, I want to be very clear about what's happening right now," she said, her words measured and precise. "You have refused to check my valid documentation. You've shown clear bias in your treatment of other passengers versus your treatment of me. And now you're attempting to prevent me from exercising my legal right to contact my attorney." A middle-aged white woman in an expensive suit stepped forward from the crowd. "I'll be a witness," she announced firmly. "I saw everything." She pulled out her own phone, deliberately making it visible to Peterson. 3 other bystanders followed her lead, phones raised. Peterson's hand moved to his belt, near his radio. "This is becoming a security situation," he threatened, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "All of you need to step back. This is a restricted area." The younger security officer who had been watching nervously finally found his voice. "Sir," he said quietly to Peterson, "maybe we should just check her documentation. It would only take a minute." "Stay out of this, Roberts." Peterson snapped at his colleague. "I know what I'm doing." He turned back to Sarah, pointing a trembling finger. "You're disturbing the peace and interfering with security protocols. I'm calling the police." Sarah took a deep breath, remembering her grandmother's words. "When they go low, you go high, but make sure you're recording it all." She pressed the voice recorder button on her phone, then spoke clearly and calmly. "Let's review what's on record so far," she began, her business training kicking in as she laid out the facts like she would in a board meeting. "At 7:15 a.m., I arrived at this private terminal, where I have been a regular client for over a year. I presented my valid documentation, which you refused to check. You've allowed several other passengers through with minimal or no scrutiny, while singling me out for harassment." More footsteps echoed through the terminal as 2 uniformed pilots approached the scene. Sarah recognized one of them, Captain Michael Chen, who had flown her to Singapore last month. His face showed recognition as well, followed by concern as he assessed the situation. "Ms. Mitchell?" Captain Chen called out, stepping forward. "Is everything all right? We've been waiting at the jet, wondering about the delay." Peterson's eyes darted between Sarah and the pilot, his certainty visibly wavering for the first time. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his position. "Stay back, Captain," Peterson warned. "This woman is trying to breach security protocols. We have procedures here." "The only person breaching protocols here is you, Officer Peterson," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. She turned to address the growing crowd directly. "I want everyone to note that it's now 7:23 a.m. I have been detained here for 8 minutes without cause, while my flight crew waits and my business appointments in New York are put at risk." The terminal doors swished open again, and quick footsteps approached. Sarah could see Peterson's face change as he looked past her, and she knew the supervisor must finally be arriving. She remained exactly where she stood, her phone still recording, her documentation still waiting on the counter. The next few moments would be crucial. Sarah had faced discrimination before, in boardrooms, at business functions, even at her own company's events. But this time was different. This time she had witnesses. This time she had evidence. This time she had the power to make real change happen. And as she heard the supervisor's footsteps getting closer, Sarah Mitchell stood tall, ready to transform this moment of injustice into a catalyst for change that would ripple through the entire aviation industry. Terminal Supervisor Patricia Rodriguez burst through the crowd, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. She was already apologizing before she reached the checkpoint, having received 3 urgent calls about the situation. As she got closer, she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening with recognition. "Miss Mitchell." Patricia's voice carried a mix of horror and disbelief. "Oh my God. Oh my God." She turned to Peterson, who was still standing with his hand on his radio, looking confused by his supervisor's reaction. "James, do you have any idea who this is?" Patricia asked, her voice shaking. She pulled out her phone and quickly opened a magazine app. There on the screen was the latest issue of Forbes magazine, and staring back at them from its cover was Sarah Mitchell's confident smile. Peterson's face drained of color as Patricia held up the phone. The magazine headline read, "Innovatech Sarah Mitchell, Revolutionizing Tech at 35. The subtitle added, "How a Black Woman CEO Built a Billion-Dollar Empire." That's not possible," Peterson stammered, looking between the phone and Sarah. His hand finally dropped from his radio. "She can't be." "I am exactly who I said I was," Sarah said quietly, still standing in the same spot. "All you had to do was check my documentation." She gestured to the papers that had been sitting untouched on the counter for the past 10 minutes. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and whispers rippled through them as people began pulling out their own phones, searching for Sarah's name. Someone in the back called out, "Hey, my company uses Innovatech software. We just signed a huge contract." Captain Chen stepped forward again, addressing Patricia directly. "Ms. Mitchell has a 9 a.m. board meeting in New York. This delay is putting her entire schedule at risk." He turned to Sarah apologetically. "The jet is fueled and ready, ma'am. We've been wondering what was causing the holdup." Patricia was now frantically flipping through Sarah's documentation, her hands trembling. "Everything is in perfect order," she announced, glaring at Peterson. "Multiple flight plans filed, all security clearances complete, presidential suite access." She looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Mitchell, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this incident." But Peterson wasn't done yet. His embarrassment had turned to defensive anger. "How was I supposed to know? She doesn't look like..." He caught himself, but it was too late. "Like what, Officer Peterson?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but carrying across the now silent terminal. "Like a CEO? Like someone who owns a private jet? Like someone who belongs here?" She paused, letting each question hang in the air. "Please, finish your thought." The young security officer, Roberts, had pulled up a video on his phone. "Sir," he said to Peterson, his voice shaking slightly, "Ms. Mitchell was just featured on CNN last week. She donated $50 million to fund tech education for minority students." More people from the terminal had gathered, including several pilots and flight attendants. One of them, an older black pilot, shook his head slowly as he watched the scene unfold. He'd seen this story before, lived it himself, but never with such a powerful witness group. Patricia was now in full damage control mode. "Ms. Mitchell, please, let me personally escort you to your aircraft. We'll have your bags brought immediately. Can we offer you anything? Coffee? Breakfast?" Her words stumbled out in a panic. Sarah finally moved, picking up her documentation from the counter with deliberate slowness. "What I want," she said clearly, "is for this to never happen to anyone else." She turned to address the crowd. "How many of you saw what happened here today?" Hands raised throughout the terminal. Phones were still recording. Peterson stood frozen, his face a mask of growing realization about what he had done and what it might mean for his career. "Good," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Because at 2 p.m. today, I'm not just announcing my company's latest acquisition in New York. I'm also going to be announcing a new initiative to combat discrimination in private aviation." She looked directly at Peterson. "And this incident will be example number 1 of why such an initiative is necessary." The terminal remained silent as Sarah's words sank in. In trying to keep her out, Peterson had just made her exactly the wrong person to mess with, not just a CEO with power and influence, but a woman with the means and motivation to create real change. And as Patricia hurriedly gathered Sarah's belongings and prepared to escort her to her jet, everyone present knew they had just witnessed something much bigger than a simple case of discrimination. They had seen the moment a movement began. The private terminal's conference room was never meant to hold so many people, but within 30 minutes of the incident, Sarah Mitchell sat at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by a mix of concerned faces. Terminal management, security personnel, and several witnesses had gathered for what was quickly becoming an emergency meeting. Patricia Rodriguez, the terminal supervisor, dabbed at her forehead with a tissue. The airport's chief of security had just arrived, along with their head of HR. Peterson sat at the far end of the table, looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. His security badge had already been temporarily suspended. "Let me be very clear," Sarah began, her voice steady and professional. I'm not interested in destroying careers today. I'm interested in creating change. She opened her laptop, pulling up a presentation she had quickly drafted while waiting for everyone to arrive. But Ms. Mitchell, the head of HR, interrupted. We want you to know that Officer Peterson's actions do not reflect our company's values. We're prepared to terminate. Sarah held up her hand. That's the easy solution, isn't it? She asked. Fire one person and pretend the problem is solved. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the private jets gleaming in the morning sun. But what happens at the next terminal? Or the next airport? How many other travelers face this kind of discrimination every day? The room fell silent. The older black pilot who had witnessed the incident nodded slowly from his corner of the room. He had been asked to stay as another witness, but his presence now felt more like that of a silent guardian. In the tech world, Sarah continued, turning back to face the room, we have a saying. Don't just fix the bug, fix the system. She clicked to the next slide on her presentation. I've had my team pull up some interesting statistics while we waited. The screen showed a graph of diversity statistics in private aviation security across the country. The numbers were dismally low for minority employees and even lower for those in management positions. This isn't just about one incident or one person, Sarah explained. This is about an entire industry that hasn't caught up with the changing face of success. She looked directly at Peterson, who finally met her gaze. Officer Peterson, would you say you had much exposure to minority executives in your career here? Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. No, ma'am, he admitted quietly. Most of our regular clients are. He trailed off, but everyone understood. Exactly, Sarah said. And that's part of the problem. But here's the opportunity. She clicked to the next slide, which outlined a comprehensive training program. I'm proposing a partnership between Innovatech and your company. We'll fund a complete overhaul of your diversity training programs, but more than that, we'll create opportunities for your staff to interact with diverse business leaders regularly. The chief of security leaned forward, interest sparking in his eyes. What exactly are you suggesting? Monthly seminars with successful minority executives to use private aviation, shadowing programs, regular diversity audits, real changes, not just sensitivity training videos. Sarah's voice grew passionate as she outlined her vision. And yes, Officer Peterson, if you're willing to be part of the solution, I want you involved too. Peterson's head snapped up in surprise. Me? He asked incredulously. But I'm the one who showed us exactly why this program is needed, Sarah finished for him. Your reaction today wasn't born in a vacuum. It came from years of assumptions and limited exposure. So help us fix that. Be part of the team that changes those assumptions for the next generation of security officers. Around the table, people began nodding. The HR director was taking rapid notes. Patricia had stopped dabbing at her face and was sitting up straighter, already thinking about implementation. I have a board meeting in New York today, Sarah said, checking her watch. In 4 hours, I'm announcing a major business acquisition, but I'm also going to announce this initiative. She looked around the room. The question is, will this terminal be remembered as the place where discrimination was exposed, or as the place where real change began? The energy in the room had shifted. What had started as a crisis management meeting was transforming into something else, the beginning of a movement. As Sarah gathered her materials to finally head to her waiting jet, she saw something she hadn't expected on Peterson's face: hope. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest changes started in the most unlikely places, with the most unlikely people. Sarah's private jet soared above the clouds, leaving Los Angeles behind. As she sat in her leather seat, her laptop open before her, she wasn't working on the acquisition announcement. Instead, she was drafting an email that would change the face of private aviation security. The plane's cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines. Captain Chen had made up some of their lost time with an expedited takeoff, approved by a very cooperative air traffic control tower. Now, at 35,000 feet, Sarah was crafting something even more important than her billion-dollar deal. Miss Mitchell, her assistant Rachel, called from across the cabin. I've gotten responses from all 5 board members. They're fully supporting your new initiative. They've also reached out to their contacts at other private aviation companies. Sarah nodded, continuing to type. On her screen was a detailed proposal titled Aviation Equality Initiative. Below it were bullet points that would soon reshape an entire industry. Mandatory quarterly diversity training for all security personnel. Partnership programs with minority business organizations. Regular audits of security interaction patterns. Anonymous reporting system for travelers. Scholarship programs for minority students interested in aviation careers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Rodriguez. Officer Peterson has asked to speak with you after your New York meeting. He says he wants to help make things right. Sarah paused her typing, remembering Peterson's face when she had offered him a chance at redemption. It would have been easier to demand his firing, to make him an example. But Sarah hadn't built her company by taking the easy path. Rachel, she called to her assistant. Please set up a video call with Officer Peterson for tomorrow morning. And contact our HR department. I want them to start developing that training program immediately. The jet hit a patch of turbulence, making Sarah's coffee cup rattle. It reminded her of how her hands had shaken during the confrontation, though she hadn't let it show. Now, hours later, she could finally admit to herself how scared she had been. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. BREAKing. Private aviation terminal faces discrimination allegations. Below it was a blurry photo of her standing at the security checkpoint, taken by one of the witnesses. It's starting, she murmured. Rachel looked up questioningly. The media coverage, Sarah explained. By the time we land in New York, this will be everywhere. She opened her email to find dozens of new messages from reporters already requesting comments. But Sarah had a different plan. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. Janet? Yes, it's Sarah Mitchell. I know we're scheduled to announce the acquisition at 2 p.m., but I need you to set up a second press conference for 3 p.m. Yes, same venue. Different topic. She turned to Rachel. Contact our legal team. I want them to draft partnership agreements with every major private aviation company in the country. We're going to offer our training program for free, but I want commitments to real change in return. Rachel nodded, already typing on her tablet. The terminal manager in LA has sent over their current security protocols. They're quite outdated. Perfect, Sarah said, surprising her assistant. That's exactly what we need, clear evidence of systemic issues. We're not just fixing one incident, we're fixing an entire system. The jet began its gradual descent toward New York. Sarah looked out the window at the city appearing through the clouds. Somewhere down there, reporters were already gathering for what they thought would be a standard business announcement. Instead, they were about to witness the launch of something much bigger. Her phone buzzed one more time. This message was different. A photo from the young security officer, Roberts. It showed Peterson sitting at a desk, reading Sarah's Forbes cover story with intense concentration. The caption read, "He's been like this for an hour. I think you really got through to him." Sarah smiled. Change didn't always come from grand gestures or harsh punishments. Sometimes it came from giving people the chance to see the world differently, to be part of the solution rather than remaining part of the problem. As the plane descended toward JFK Airport, Sarah finished her proposal. The document that had started as a response to discrimination had evolved into a blueprint for industry-wide transformation. In just a few hours, she would share it with the world. And somewhere back in Los Angeles, a security officer named James Peterson was beginning to understand that his worst mistake might just help prevent countless others from making the same one. The New York press conference room buzzed with energy as journalists packed every available seat. It was 3:15 p.m., and Sarah Mitchell had just finished announcing Innovatech's biggest acquisition. But instead of ending the press conference, she remained at the podium, her expression serious. "Before we conclude today," she said into the microphone, "I have another announcement to make." The room fell silent as Sarah described the morning's events in Los Angeles. Several reporters gasped when she showed the video clips captured by witnesses. But this story isn't about one incident or one person, Sarah continued, her voice strong and clear. It's about systemic issues that have gone unchallenged for too long. She clicked to the next slide, revealing the details of her Aviation Equality Initiative. Within minutes, #Aviation Equality was trending on Twitter. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards as Sarah outlined her plan for industry-wide change. The live stream viewer count jumped from thousands to hundreds of thousands. Then something unexpected happened. As Sarah finished her presentation, a hand raised in the back of the room. It belonged to Marcus Thompson, CEO of rival aviation services company Skylight. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, standing up, "Skylight would like to be the first to join your initiative. We've had similar incidents reported at our terminals, and quite frankly, we've been too slow to address them." He paused, looking around the room. "We're prepared to commit $50 million to match your program's funding." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. 3 more aviation companies were already reaching out to join the program. This was becoming bigger than she had imagined. Back in Los Angeles, Officer James Peterson sat in the terminal break room, watching the live stream on his phone. Other security officers gathered around him, their faces reflecting a mix of emotions as they watched their industry being transformed in real time. "She could have destroyed me," Peterson said quietly to his colleagues. "Instead, she's giving us all a chance to be better." He looked down at the diversity training manual he'd been reading all morning, seeing it with new eyes. Social media exploded with similar stories. A black tech entrepreneur shared his experience of being blocked from his own chartered flight. A successful Asian CEO described being repeatedly asked to show extra identification. A Middle Eastern business owner talked about constant random security checks. But now, these stories came with a solution. Sarah's initiative provided a clear pathway for reporting incidents and tracking progress. By the end of the press conference, over 50 private aviation companies had pledged to join the program. The next morning, major newspapers carried the story on their front pages. Tech CEO turns discrimination into industry revolution. Private aviation giants unite for equality. Innovat Tech's Mitchell. Change starts with choice. Sarah's inbox filled with messages of support and thanks. But the email that caught her attention came from an unexpected source, Officer Peterson's daughter. "Dear Ms. Mitchell, my dad came home different yesterday. He told us what happened, and then he talked to me about my dreams of becoming a pilot. He never took that seriously before. Today, he helped me look up flight schools. Thank you for not giving up on him. Jessica Peterson." The impact rippled beyond private aviation. Other industries began examining their own security protocols. Corporate America watched as Sarah demonstrated how to handle discrimination with grace while demanding real change. A week later, Sarah returned to the same Los Angeles terminal. As she approached security, she saw new signs posted everywhere: respect, dignity, and equal treatment for all passengers. The security staff wore new badges that included their training certification levels. Officer Roberts, the young security officer who had witnessed the original incident, now wore a supervisor's badge. "Welcome back, Ms. Mitchell," he said professionally, properly checking her documentation. "We've made some changes since your last visit." Sarah noticed Peterson working at a different checkpoint, carefully explaining security procedures to an elderly Asian couple, his manner respectful and patient. When he saw her, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement, not of shame, but of gratitude. As Sarah walked to her gate, she overheard a young black girl asking her mother, "Can I be like her when I grow up?" The mother smiled, watching Sarah walk past. "Yes, baby. Thanks to her, you can be anything you want to be and go anywhere you want to go." 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at the Los Angeles private terminal. On a bright autumn day, Sarah Mitchell's car pulled up to the same entrance, but this time, everything was different. The terminal itself had been transformed. New signs welcomed visitors in multiple languages, and the security area had been redesigned to be more open and welcoming. Digital screens displayed information about passengers' rights and the terminal's commitment to equality. As Sarah walked through the entrance, she noticed a familiar face. James Peterson was conducting a training session in a glass-walled room near the security checkpoint. He stood before a diverse group of new security officers, pointing to slides that Sarah recognized from her initiative's training program. "Ms. Mitchell," Peterson called out when he saw her. He excused himself from his class and walked over to greet her. The nervousness that had once characterized their interactions was gone, replaced by genuine respect. "Officer Peterson," Sarah replied warmly. Or should I say Chief Training Officer Peterson now? She had heard about his promotion through Patricia Rodriguez, who now served as the terminal's Director of Diversity and Inclusion. Peterson smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been waiting for a chance to speak with you properly. He gestured to a quiet corner of the terminal. Do you have a moment before your flight? Sarah nodded, following him to a small seating area. The terminal was busy with morning traffic, and she noticed something striking. The travelers represented a much more diverse group than 6 months ago. Word had spread that this terminal had become a model of inclusive service. I want you to know, Peterson began, his voice thick with emotion, that day changed my life. Not just my job, my whole life. He pulled out his wallet and showed Sarah a photo of his daughter in a pilot's uniform. Jessica started flight school last month. She said you showed her that anything is possible. Sarah smiled, remembering the email she had received from Jessica months ago. How are the new training programs going? She asked, glancing at the classroom where Peterson's trainees were reviewing their materials. We've trained over 200 officers from different terminals across the country, Peterson said proudly. And each one of them hears my story, how my prejudice almost cost me everything, and how your compassion gave me a chance to become someone better. A young black executive walked past their seating area, nodding respectfully to both Sarah and Peterson. She was one of many new regular clients who had chosen this terminal specifically because of its reformed practices. The numbers speak for themselves, Peterson continued. Complaints are down 97%, customer satisfaction is at an all-time high, and our staff diversity has increased by 200%. He gestured around the terminal. But the real change is in how it feels here now. Everyone knows they belong. Sarah's phone buzzed. A news alert about Innovatech's Aviation Equality Initiative. The program had just been adopted by its 100th airport. What had started in this terminal had spread across the country, then internationally. I hear you're speaking at the National Aviation Security Conference next month, Sarah said. Peterson nodded, still seeming amazed at how far he had come. They want me to talk about our transformation here, about how one moment of confrontation became a catalyst for industry-wide change. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. About how sometimes our worst mistakes can lead to our greatest growth. The terminal's PA system announced Sarah's flight was ready for boarding. As she stood to leave, Peterson had one more thing to say. My grandson was born last week, he said softly. I'm going to make sure he grows up in a world where he judges people only by their character, where he knows that success doesn't look just one way. He extended his hand to Sarah. Thank you for showing me that change is always possible. As Sarah walked to her gate, she passed the spot where she had stood 6 months ago, fighting for her dignity. Now, a plaque hung on the wall, dedicated to equality, respect, and dignity for all. Change starts here. Her pilot met her at the gate, a young woman of color who had been hired through the initiative's new recruitment program. Ready for takeoff, Ms. Mitchell? Sarah looked back at the terminal one last time. Peterson had returned to his class, teaching the next generation of security officers how to protect and respect in equal measure. New faces filled the terminal, representing the changing face of success in America, and somewhere in Los Angeles, a little boy was growing up with a grandfather who would teach him to see the best in everyone. Yes, Sarah replied, smiling. I'm ready for whatever comes next.